Patriot Radio News Hour on a Thursday. I am Jason. I'm an owner of the Patriot Trading Group. I'm the minority owner, and Joe Jake, with the majority owner of Patriot Trading Group, is taking a couple of days off. Everybody needs a couple of days off. I haven't had mine off for a while. I'm looking to get my days off here sometime in the future, but I'm going to do another solo show. I had some good response from yesterday's show. I'm going to play a little more Joe Brown starting next segment. About the United States government has a plan in place. Whether they execute it or not will be the question. But they buying a huge amount of Bitcoin and making it a strategic reserve. So we'll get into that next segment. If there's time left in the show later on down the road in the Thursday edition of the Patriot Radio News Hour, I might talk a little bit about Bitcoin being, it's been done before, actually, except for this time with cryptocurrencies. You have a lot of government interference, a lot of government trying to cap it and get on top of this thing. But, people have dealt with the bankers before, and the American citizens fought valiantly for the century of the 1800s, trying to keep those things in the Constitution alive and well. And it was a back and forth battle, and different politicians had different agendas. And you wanted, if you were an anti-banker, you wanted to get anti-banker presidents in and congressmen in, and it was a battle that as soon as we got into the early 1900s, that was lost. But it was a valiant fight through the 1800s. And one of the things that happened is when the bankers would cause very much struggle and strife and hardships, the people of the United States would rise up and do something about it. And they did this in the 1830s and the 1840s. And it's something that we're not seeing anymore, and this is why we do what Joe and I do. What we do, people didn't really buy and sell gold and silver in the 1800s. That was not something that people did. You didn't buy and sell gold and silver. You didn't do, unless you were in a market where you used those materials for something. You didn't do it. Gold and silver was the money. You used it as money. You didn't buy it. You worked for it. You worked a job. You were a business owner. You were a farmer. You produced things, and you traded it for currency. And the currency, back before we were all born, was gold and silver. Now, you had paper money, and paper money is good. It's good to have a paper promise as long as you can go to the bank and trade it in for the gold. And what we have today is gold and silver is still real money, but the monetary system we're under doesn't see it that way, and they manipulate and use whatever assets available. And with the things that are getting ready to happen, the things that Joe has been reporting on, the numbers and the stuff we've been talking about, there's looks like some pretty ugly stuff. The further lowering of the standard of living is being pushed upon us again, and it's a very smart system the way they've set it up. Every generation's born into a lower standard of living. I get irritated when the baby boomers and the millennials, the Gen Xers, and they try to classify chunks of people into categories. But every year there's new people born, and every year old people die. But they want to put you in these little boxes, right? So that when the lower standard of living is happening, Dad said that he used to do this and this, and Grandpa said he was the only one working, and he had vacations and he had pensions, and the family was happy. The mom stayed at home, and Mom and Dad both had to work, and they got retirement, but they had to work a lot harder for it, and now. Well, I'm working 2 jobs. My wife is working 2 jobs, but now she's going to divorce me because we can't deal with the stress, and the kids are failing in school, which doesn't really matter. And the TV tells us we should be mad at this side of politics and blame the other side. And So they box it. Well, my kid said it's Grandpa's fault, and I'm kind of starting to wonder if it was my dad's fault. And then Grandpa's like, "You need to go work more, kid. It's still there. Go get it." It's like, well, you just go ahead and die because you took it from us. You borrowed us into oblivion. There's no generations. That's a made up construct. It's a made up construct so that those that rule over you can have you fight amongst each other. It's not Grandpa's fault. Now maybe Grandpa and his generation should have shepherded in better leadership and tried to push against this, but it's not Grandpa's fault. He did what he did during his time. Our kids, our grandkids are going to do whatever they can do in their time, right? But because this is this system that we're under is long in the tooth, we're going to be given all of these ridiculous things that Joe and I talk about. We're going to talk about Bitcoin reserves and how they're going to finagle the price of the gold reserves in America to pay for it, which is just going to lead to a lower standard of living. So that kids that even aren't even born today can blame us for their lower standard of living. But you know what? They don't know any better. Every generation seems to accept their lower standard of living because they just don't know what a higher standard of living feels like. So stay tuned. We're going to talk. Got Joe Brown coming in with some Bitcoin. All right, welcome back, Patriot Radio News Hour. Let's get into this thing.
Establish a permanent strategic Bitcoin reserve, purchasing almost 5% of the entire Bitcoin supply, and it would use gold revaluation in order to fund these purchases. This bill was introduced by Congressman Nick Begich alongside Congressman Jared Golden. This is called the American Reserve Modernization Act of 2026, or ARMA. I don't know why, but they always love making these things into acronyms. And this builds on the earlier Bitcoin Act framework, which is why this probably sounds familiar to you, because a bill like this has been introduced before. The prior bill was introduced by Senator Cynthia Lummis, and it didn't make it all the way through. Now, if you're thinking, wait a second, I thought we already had a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We do. It was created by the Trump administration under executive order. And executive orders are quick. They're easy. The president can just do it, but they're fragile because the next incoming president, if they want, can just undo it. Whereas if you get Congress to codify something into law with legislation, it is a lot less likely that that gets overturned by future versions of Congress. Instead of just needing one person with a different opinion to come in and do things differently, you need the entire Congress to vote for something to happen or to undo something that they've already done. This bill would authorize the Treasury to purchase up to 200,000 Bitcoin per year for 5 years, and that would get them to 1 million Bitcoin in the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. Now, we know that there are only 21 million total Bitcoins that can ever come into existence. Right now, most of them have been mined, but over the course of the next 100 years or so, the last 1 million or so are going to be mined, which means that 1 million is quite a large percentage. In fact, if we want to know exactly how much of the total Bitcoin supply the U.S. government would own underneath this plan, all we have to do is divide 1 by 21, and we see it comes out to approximately 4.7%. So a little less than 5% of the entire Bitcoin supply would be owned and held by the U.S. government, and there would be a 20-year hold applied to all federally controlled Bitcoin, including the few 100,000 that they already have. So number one, this is a monster purchase that will take place over the next 5 years if this thing does get pushed through. Right now, Bitcoin is trading at $77,000, which means if they were able to purchase all 1 million at $77,000, which obviously would be pretty impossible considering just that purchasing alone would have the effect of driving the price up higher. But let's just say they were able to accumulate it at the current price. They would be spending approximately $77 billion. But you also have to expect they're going to be soaking up much of the available supply, which means there would be fewer and fewer people willing to sell at these low prices if somebody like the U.S. government is coming up and buying up all of that supply, which will drive the price much higher. Which means over the next 5 years, if they drive the price of Bitcoin so high that their average cost ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's say, $200,000, then they'd be spending roughly $200 billion on this Bitcoin purchasing. So the first question is, why why are they targeting 1 million or 4.7% of the total supply? And the answer is because they're trying to get fairly close to the allocation that the United States government owns of the total gold supply. Counting official reserves, the United States currently has well over 8,000 tons of gold, which represents somewhere between 3.5% to 5% of total above ground gold supplies. So this bill aims to get the exact same percentage of the Bitcoin supply as the United States currently allegedly holds of the total gold supply. Now, it's important to note here that the way they drafted this bill is a way where they say that the reserve would be established without cost to American taxpayers, and that any sale of Bitcoin would only be for the purposes of reducing the national debt, meaning that in the future, the Bitcoin that they accumulate could not be used and sold off just to fund general expenses. It could only be used to reduce the debt, but also they're saying that it wouldn't cost the American taxpayer anything. They're calling this a revenue neutral plan. Now, anytime you hear the words revenue neutral from a politician, that should throw up some red flags, because you know as well as I do, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I wouldn't expect lawmakers to understand this. I would fully expect them to be ignorant of economic reality, because as the saying goes, ignorance is 9/10 of the law. But the way that they would try and do it to not have a cost to American taxpayers is through something called gold revaluation. Now, like we already talked about, the United States holds over 8,000 tons of gold. The legal value of that gold is set at $42 per troy ounce, because that's what it was worth in 1973. So what in the world is gold revaluation? How does it work? And how would that supply any funds to be able to purchase Bitcoin without it costing the taxpayer anything? Well, the Federal Reserve actually released just last year a paper on official reserve revaluations and how the rest of the world has done this throughout history. Because right now, the official value of the gold that the United States holds is $42.22 per troy ounce, and the U.S. government holds 261.5 million troy ounces of gold. So the legal value of the gold that the United States government owns is about $11 billion. But if you know anything about gold, you know that it's not worth $42 an ounce. It's worth $4,500 per ounce. Now, it's worth noting here that troy ounce and ounce are actually different. One troy ounce is about 31.1 grams. One regular standard ounce is about 28 grams. But just for round numbers, let's say they mark to market, which means they just legally state the gold that they own is now worth what it is worth on the open market if they were to try and sell it, and they could get the current prices. And you're going to take 261,500,000 times roughly $4,400 per ounce. You're going to see that they hold well over $1 trillion worth of gold at current market values. So at the current market value of somewhere between $4,000 to $5,000 per ounce, the U.S. government's gold stockpile is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 to $1.3 trillion. Now let's backtrack a bit. How much did we say that it would cost to purchase 1 million Bitcoin? Well, even if they drive up the cost of Bitcoin so much that their average cost is $200,000, it would still only cost them $200 billion, which means that they're using the value of the gold that they own in order to purchase 1 million Bitcoin. They have a huge margin to drive the price of Bitcoin higher and still be able to purchase as much as they want. In fact, if they had to use the entire value of their gold stack in order to purchase 1 million Bitcoin, all we have to do is divide 1 trillion by 1 million, and we get 1 million, which means technically if they were using gold revaluation in order to purchase the entire 1 million Bitcoin stockpile, and I'll explain how that's going to work in just a moment, they could purchase Bitcoin up to a total average cost of $1 million per Bitcoin. Now, is it possible that their purchasing alone, plus the frenzy to buy Bitcoin that causes, could drive Bitcoin up that high? Yes, it's possible. I don't think it's likely, because I think at certain points along the way, you're going to trigger a bunch of...
So, and Joe Brown, he's really good at putting the information out. He does his own, he tells you what he thinks is going to happen, but he doesn't speculate nearly as much as I do. Listen, Trump's kids, Trump Jr., the Trump boys, this video came out, Joe Brown put this out about last week, and Bitcoin was 77,000. As of this morning, right now, it's been going down. It's down to 64,000. The Trump guys are saying, well, Bitcoin's going to be $1 million. They've been saying that. Well, look at the numbers Joe Brown just gave you. It shows you that depending on what it costs to get this stock of Bitcoin could go up massively. Why would the federal government want to add this to their stockpile? I think it's because, like all currencies, the dollar is still going to be around, but there's a lot of nations that really are not very excited about this. The federal government knows that if there's a currency that's going to be flocked to, and if it's going to be Bitcoin or whatever crypto that gains traction, that they better hold a significant amount so they can control the market. Owning 5% of all Bitcoin is a great way to be able to move it up or down as you see fit. Because what does the bankers care about? They care about their currencies. Now, where Bitcoin is, what it came from, is it CIA? Is it government? I think most likely it is. But we're heading into an inflation cycle. Judge Joe and I have been talking about this, and this could be a long inflationary cycle. Bitcoin, if people are running to cryptos, like look at what we're doing. We've been selling Texas coin, and now I'm moving on to Orem. And Orem is a good play to try to earn money past the inflation. Most likely, we have inflation that's somewhere between 8 to 10% right now, and that's going to get worse. So you have to find ways to not sit on money that earns you less than the inflation minimally. Well, Bitcoin is a great place for the inflation to go to try to control the inflation and to keep up with the inflation at the same time, which is exactly what this strategic buy of Bitcoin is going to be about. It was created by somebody, I think probably government. Now the U.S. federal government and probably other governments will follow suit. Will start to hold positions in this. They've already put their positions in gold together. Isn't that interesting? How these other nations over the last bunch of years that might have been out of gold, they're all starting to position back into gold. Now, don't be surprised if you start to see positioning into Bitcoin and maybe other crypto assets to weather this inflative storm, this tremendously damaging economic phase that we're heading into. And that's what this is about. Jack, go ahead and continue to play it.
You're going to get a lot of people who bought it 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 start selling and taking profits.
I find it interesting because as Joe Brown's talking, and I said a moment ago, Bitcoin's down to 64,000. If the government's going to jump in to start buying this stuff, you better believe they're going to try to get as much of it purchased as they can at the lowest possible price. Who wouldn't, right? Go ahead, Jack.
But even if it does, how does gold revaluation actually produce the cash needed in order to purchase all this Bitcoin? Well, you can go through and read the revaluation paper that the Federal Reserve released last year, but it's very simple. It's an accounting gimmick to print money. And that's why I said earlier that anytime you hear a politician say something is revenue neutral, that it won't cost the taxpayers anything, you have to be concerned. You have to see those red flags pop up because something fishy is going on. So the first thing that we have to understand is the way that the United States government currently holds its gold. And this goes back to President Roosevelt's gold program, where he illegally confiscated gold from all American citizens and suspended convertibility of the dollar into gold for all American citizens, outlawed the ownership of gold, and then after he confiscated all the gold from American citizens, he then raised the price of gold, which allowed them to just print more money because the number of dollars they could print was directly proportional to the amount of gold that the government held in reserves. And so first he confiscated all the gold from American citizens, then he by law declared that the value of that gold was higher, and that allowed him to print even more dollars on the higher number of ounces that he had just taken in. In this process, the federal government holds the gold, but the Federal Reserve holds gold certificates. And these gold certificates are where it says that the value of the gold is $42.22 per troy ounce. And so if this bill is passed, what would happen is the U.S. Treasury would give new certificates to the Federal Reserve that instead of saying, hey, you have gold certificates that are worth $42.22 per troy ounce, and you've got 261.5 million troy ounces of gold in gold certificates, they would give them new gold certificates that stated the current value or maybe an average of the recent value. Either way, probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of where gold is trading right now. And because the federal government would be handing the Federal Reserve new certificates that were worth a lot more, they'd be taking the old certificates in exchange. The same number of ounces represented with those certificates, but now the legal value declared on them is much, much higher. But here's the thing about accounting.
Let's pause it.
You can't just have a credit without a debit.
Jack, let's pause it. We'll back it up a couple seconds there. We'll do a little more on this piece. We got a little bit more on it, and well, you can buy gold and silver. 800-951-0592. Patriot Trading Group. Welcome back. The Patriot Radio News Hour. I find it interesting is we're talking gold revaluation to buy a strategic asset. Silver's been. What was that, Jack? Did you say something? Oh, hello. Oh, I thought you said something. Silver's up $1 today. Gold is up $36.95 at the moment. So gold is just holding a little below $4,500. Silver is about $73.50, $73.76. But it's interesting that gold and silver, after its run up, leading into early this year, has been sort of going sideways, and now you have this talk about a Bitcoin reserve and revaluing, and Joe Brown said an average gold price, which whatever that would be valued at, and we got gold just kind of going sideways. So what that means is, I think gold is going to be going sideways for a little while longer. This creates a buying opportunity because we don't know when they're going to possibly enact this. And when they do, maybe they want a higher average price of $5,000, and you might see a very violent turn up. Because if you're going to revalue the gold and buy an asset, they're going to want to figure out how much runway they've got, how much is it going to really cost to get it there. And the revaluation's got to match that so they can accomplish the goal. So I think $4,500 gold is pretty safe right now. I think $72 to $75 silver is pretty safe right now, and we might be boring in gold and silver. Boring is the best time to buy. Lots of people selling gold and silver, guys. Lots of people selling. Lots of people having tough times trying to make ends meet. So if you can, number one, hold on to what you got, and better yet, number two, buy more. Great time to do it. Call us at 800-951-0592. Jack, let's get back into the video as to how the U.S. government's going to accomplish this feat. Go ahead.
But now the legal value declared on them is much, much higher. But here's the thing about accounting. You can't just have a credit without a debit. You can't have a debit without a credit. So the Federal Reserve would have to account for the fact that they just got an influx of an extra $1 trillion worth of value. And the way they would do that is literally by printing new dollars and transferring those new dollars to the Treasury General account. And so then on the Federal Reserve's side of things, everything is flat even. They receive some pieces of paper that are worth $1 trillion. They print $1 trillion and send those $1 trillion out. So on their end, no change has taken place. Accounting, good. Neutral, even, we're clear. Then the Treasury General account, which is literally just the U.S. government's bank account that they hold at the Federal Reserve, it would receive a deposit of roughly $1 trillion. And then this bill, the American Reserve Modernization Act, will have already stated what that $1 trillion must be used for, which is to purchase 1 million Bitcoin over the course of the next 5 years. So in case that was a little convoluted or confusing, let me give a quick recap of this process that would happen if the American Reserve Modernization Act does become law. Step number one, the Treasury creates new gold certificates that have the current market value of gold stated on them. The Treasury then goes to the Federal Reserve and exchanges those new gold certificates for the old gold certificates, replacing them at the Federal Reserve so that the Federal Reserve now has gold certificates showing the same number of ounces but the current market value. Because that would be an immediate increase of over $1 trillion of value for the Federal Reserve, they have to account for that somehow, and so they would do that by printing $1 trillion and crediting it to the U.S. government's checking account, which is called the Treasury General account. That way, from an accounting perspective, nothing has changed at the Federal Reserve, and the U.S. government gets a deposit of about $1 trillion. The bill then would state that the U.S. government must use that money in order to purchase 200,000 Bitcoin per year for the next 5 years till they get up to 1 million, or roughly 4.7% of the total Bitcoin supply, so that the U.S. government holds a roughly equal percentage of the Bitcoin supply as they do of the gold supply. And in this way, there's no extra borrowing, there's no taxing. The U.S. government keeps all of the gold that it has. It's not selling anything. And the U.S. government now has an equal percentage of Bitcoin going forward. And because it's codified into law through legislation, it is unlikely to be changed as easily as something like an executive order. So at this point, you're probably asking, what's the catch? Because there's always a catch. Again, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody is going to foot the bill. And your little spidey senses may have been triggered when you hear that the Fed would be printing $1 trillion and handing it to the government, but then they're only using it to buy Bitcoin. So what is the downside? Well, the downside is that they have to be buying that Bitcoin from somebody. There's no such thing as dollars flowing into an asset or dollars flowing out of an asset. Dollars flow from one bank account to another bank account. Money doesn't go into gold, out of Bitcoin, into real estate, out of stocks. That's not actually how it works. Dollars go from one bank account to another bank account. That's it. That means Bitcoin ownership goes from one person to another person, and in this case, from a person or an entity to the U.S. government. So dollars flow one way from one bank account to another, and the ownership of that Bitcoin flows the other way from that person to the U.S. government. So this means that whether it's $77 billion, $150 billion, $500 billion, or more that the U.S. government has to spend to buy up all the Bitcoin that it needs, by the end, all of that money is newly created dollars that are entering the economy first to the people who sell their Bitcoin to the U.S. government. Those people will then use those dollars for something else. Maybe they loan those dollars back to the U.S. government by buying treasuries. And then those dollars get recirculated into the economy wherever else the government spends the money. Maybe those people use those dollars to purchase stocks. Maybe those people use those dollars for consumption and they buy a house or they buy cars. But every time that dollar then gets spent on something, that dollar is going into somebody else's bank account, and then it's going to be spent on something else, whether it's investment or consumption. But either way, we're going to have, if this passes, hundreds of billions of dollars of newly created money that is entering the economy through these Bitcoin purchases. All else being equal, that means inflation. Now, that doesn't mean that we are guaranteed to see prices go up as a result of this, because not all else is always equal. We have other things happening in the economy. We have deleveraging happening some places. We have energy crises happening some places. We have production increasing some places. And so you cannot isolate these things on their own. But this by itself is an inflationary pressure on the overall economy, because you have new money entering the system. And so while the reserve would be established without cost to American taxpayers, insofar as they wouldn't have to pay more taxes, that is true, but it is not true that it would be established without cost to American taxpayers in total, because American taxpayers still have to foot the bill for the higher cost of living that inflation causes, or at the very least, the lack of a drop in the cost of living that inflationary actions prevent. As always, with any government action, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers that the entity with the monopoly on violence is choosing through their political actions. And the American Reserve Modernization Act is no different. Usually the winners are asset holders and the losers are savers and wage earners.
Welcome back to the Patriot Radio News Hour. We just got done playing that piece, the Bitcoin Reserve. And this stuff is already written up. We'll see if it gets voted through. I have a feeling it'll be one of those that has bipartisan if it does go through. Whether they pass that now or they pass it after the midterms, I wouldn't know for sure. But one thing, I think more along the lines of what would a very greedy, corrupt monetary system do with such a situation. Because one thing Joe Brown did not talk about, and I didn't see it in the many documents that he put on the screen, if you were watching, if you watched the show later, there was nothing in there that said that the government couldn't sell it. That's where Joe Brown, everybody has, a lot of these guys on YouTube and radio shows, TV shows, a lot of guys are there's a lot of smart guys out there, and I don't pretend to be any better, but when I watch stuff, I always try to figure out, okay, strategic reserve, I guess that makes sense. We're going into this crypto world and digital assets, I get it, but why? They already can print all the money they want. They don't really need to do this. They want $1 trillion. They can get it. It has to be a little bit of a fight sometimes, but they always get what they want. Why this? And I can tell you right now, this is a competing currency, and there has to be some sort of lever of control, and that would be, if we own 5% of it, us with our other entities, private buyers, other governments, we could control very easily, especially if just this entity, the United States government, owns 5%. They could sell it. They could sell it. Now think about what great control they can have over competing currency, this being cryptocurrency, when you can really hit it hard by selling it. And by the way, when you own 5% of something that's as big as Bitcoin has gotten, you can keep your reserve. Remember, the bill that is being proposed is for 1 million Bitcoin, which is a little less than 5%. You sell it, you push the price down, you make people panic sell. Like any market that we've had, any market crash, with markets that actually have companies behind those stocks, and you can keep your $1 million reserve by buying it back up when it goes down. It looks like, to me, the federal government is going to be getting into the market control segment of American society. The Japanese government already owns a majority of the entire Japanese stock market. This would be a way for the United States government to keep the dollar a little more stable and viable. They don't want the dollar to completely go away. They don't want the currency system to really completely go away. They don't want it to change to a digital crypto system where something they don't own and control replaces them. So there's two ways to control something that you don't have control of. One, you buy it up. That's the easiest way if you have the money to buy up some new system. The other way is to make it illegal, right? You make it illegal to use, and in a worldwide monetary system, it's going to be harder and harder to make something illegal because, as you see with the war in Iran, some countries don't want to do it your way. The invasion and negotiation with President Maduro in Venezuela, these things have to be negotiated. So Venezuela has been bought up, right, in this monetary system, and right now it appears Iran is they're trying to take it. Right, they're making Iran illegal. They're going to take it. So, those are your analogy, and this is where we are in this world. There will be very few avenues for you to go against this system. There's very few outlets, and the best thing for the average person who can't control this political and geopolitical nightmare that is way out of the average person's control is to learn the system and learn where to position yourself so that you are enslaved a little bit less than the other guy. I say many times over the years, how much freedom can you afford? Being a slave or being controlled in some fashion, and especially in your economic life, there's nothing you can do if you're not allowed to do the things you want to do, if you're not allowed to travel and consume, buy and sell without the government on your back, then you got to figure out what's the way to make the government weigh a little bit less on your back. It's the main reason I ever got into gold and silver and got heavy into it is because it's such a great way to hold value outside the control of government, of centralized banking control. They monkey around with the price. They still mess around with that. I think gold is being manipulated a little bit right now. I think the prices have been strangely sideways for a while, but not even the bankers they've never been smart enough and haven't figured out any scheme to make gold go to zero. If bankers can make gold zero, they would do it tomorrow. They have plenty of controls in place right now that they would love gold to be zero, but they don't have the power to do it. They just don't. There's too many free-thinking individuals across the planet inside of their centralized governments that know that I better hold a little bit of this aside. And gold is really it. I mean, silver's great, and I really, really like silver for many, many, many reasons. It's a little different than gold, but gold is really, I mean, that's, you just, as expensive as it is, you should always put a little bit into gold. You have to have some of it in there. I know there's a lot of silver guys with silver-gold ratio, and they talk about this and that and everything else, and I like silver. I own silver, so silver's great. But as you see, they're not reevaluating its strategic silver reserve to play games. They're begrudgingly going to raise their $42 an ounce gold stack to very easily get $1 trillion going their way and try to control this thing, guys. Well, Joe will be back tomorrow. We'll be talking cryptos, and we got a crypto meeting here at the radio station tomorrow. All right, final segment. Look, we have a Texit meeting coming up tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Be there. If you have any misgivings, misunderstandings, frustrations, excitement, questions, wonders about the Texit coin, show up here. I will guarantee it's going to be a night to remember. I have a feeling. It's going to be it's a little bit unpredictable what will happen, but I think should be very interesting. So get on over here. We're taking reservations. I know we've at least got 40 people reserved. I think we'll end up with 70, but don't hold me to that number. I got some people reacting to what I played about the gold revaluation, and Glenn came in, and Glenn and I think a lot alike, but Glenn the only way we're a little different is he operates more on the what's considered the facts or the alternative facts, and how that's going to apply. And a lot of times it doesn't matter with the federal government what facts there are. Joe Brown in that video said, "Look, this is a paper-for-paper transaction." What was sent in is like all of this plan teeters on the gold. If it's actually present, it doesn't have to be present. The reason it doesn't have to be present is because the government says they have that much. It's an accounting. Now, if the bank says they have $100,000 in cash in the bank at that moment, but there's only $10,000 in actual cash there, the balance sheet rules what the bank is going to do and the people that do business with the bank. It doesn't matter if they only have $10,000. So I do understand that. The way that this is going, the way that this $1 trillion and the buying of Bitcoin is going to happen is it will be a trade for the value of the gold going up, for the amount of gold that's reported to be in possession of the United States government. By the way, it's a great way. So, Glenn, it's a great way to position yourself with a strategic asset when you maybe don't have it to begin with, right? So maybe this is a way to position themselves into a valuable asset that they've sold off the other one. Who knows? The next text said is, and it is, yeah. So covering more on that. So listen, hey, if you like the show, let us know. Joe's going to be back tomorrow. We're going to talk a whole bunch of stuff: gold, silver, cryptos, Orem, Texit, and we will. We'll be here to get us into that meeting tomorrow night.